We all love blinding people with sand, but sometimes society doesn't respond well to these simple pleasures. Lucky for you and me, Baldur's Gate 3 recently added Sand Toss, giving you the ultimate ability to reach into your pocket and throw sand in people's eyes. I knew it was my destiny to beat the game using only this move. With a max damage of 6, bad range, and no chance of hurting objects, it's time to see if you can beat Baldur's Gate 3 using only pocket sand. There's only one rule for this challenge: all damage must be caused by pocket sand. For roleplay purposes, we needed an exotic fantasy pirate, and thus our hero was born. John Sand woke up on the Nautilord, turned off all his reactions, and met up with Lae'zel, who forgot that we didn't have access to Sand Toss until level 4, so she pushed us into combat and had to hide in the corner while I died. After one quick resurrection, I freed Shadowheart, who I dragged to the beach, stole everything she owned, and stuffed her pockets filled with sand. We then came across a man just begging to join the Sand Toss only run. Isn't that right, Gale?
No doubt.
Astarion was less enthusiastic about the challenge and immediately tried to fail it. But after I took away all of his abilities, he was a little more willing to see things our way, and hid in the Grove battle to leech XP, while Shadowheart cosplayed as a drow. This allowed us to get all the way to the Goblin camp, where we would speedrun into the Underdark and pick up Falar Alluve. Boosting the damage of Sand Toss is almost impossible, but this weapon is a good first step. It has a unique ability called Shriek or Sing, which for 5 turns will allow us to deal an additional 1d4 thunder damage to all of our attacks. This is very nice. We also picked up the Luminous Armor here. It's not very important now, but will be very important later. We stole a backpack from a trapped dwarf.
What are you doing? Get out of there!
And that night, we had a very strange dream.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay. Do you understand that? Turn the friggin' frogs gay. Serious crap. Gay. Frogs, friggin' frogs. It's not funny.
I'm not gonna lie, I didn't really understand the subtext of that dream, but I started eating every frog I could find. Freeing Councillor Floric was slightly more difficult than usual, but I found you could move this barrel and then keep jiggling it in the cutscene. Astarion asked some friendly ogres for some help reaching level 4, and they kindly obliged, finally unlocking Sand Toss. It was also around this time that I tested just about every feat in the game and found that only Savage Attacker works with Sand Toss. The first few combat encounters shows just how abysmal our damage really is. However, it started off with a 3v1 and a surprise round against a solo guy, so it wasn't that tough. However, when we decided to use this door as a choke point, the enemies decided they would teleport through the wall. Things got a little hectic from this point on. We also learned in this fight that because we only use bonus actions to attack, using the action dash and disengage would become crucial in order to make sure that I could survive and maneuver safely. The throw action would also become critical in order to heal ourselves without using bonus actions. All in all, this fight would serve as a learning experience, and Gale headed back to camp to resurrect us and show a trick. If you position Wither's inventory directly over his body, you don't have to click back and forth between him and the inventory. You can spam click in the one spot over and over again until you get the gold. He was then forced to watch our ogre friends die and played them a sad song on the world's smallest violin. The goblins hated his performance, but we did get a nice pair of boots. We then decided it would be a good idea to go to Grimforge, and we were again beaten with blunt objects until we stopped moving. In a desperate attempt to find friends, we headed to the mountain pass. Gale became a female Githyanki and went to go chat with the locals. They promptly pulled a 180, put a bolt through his eye, and chopped him into little pieces. It became clear to us at this point that the Githyanki were not your average racists, so Astarion became a male Githyanki and walked right in. Exploring more of the based Githyanki Kresh would lead to a couple more frogs. This allowed us to unlock Psionic Overload, adding a 1d4 psychic damage at the cost of us taking 1d4 every turn. Now don't get me wrong, I love gooning to the idea of racial purity as much as you and the Githyanki do. But the reality of the situation is we need to get stronger and fast if we have any hope of completing this challenge. So, with that in mind, we headed to Moonrise. It was here that we unlocked level 5 and the Rogue's Uncanny Dodge passive. This will cut in half all damage dealt to us, seriously increasing our survivability. Gale also ran around to collect 2 rings that would allow us to cast Warding Bond on each other. As long as this is active, we are resistant to all damage, and therefore only take half of what we should. This actually stacks with the Uncanny Dodge passive, meaning if an attack were to hit us for 20 damage, it would be cut in half by Warding Bond, bringing it to 10, and then that would be cut in half again by Uncanny Dodge, bringing it to 5. We will be returning to this mechanic later. In the meantime, Gale has to go pick up everyone's favorite ring, and he was totally fine afterwards. This, in combination with our chest plate and some gloves I found just lying around in the creche, effectively turned our pocket sand into pocket flashbangs with a chance to knock our opponents over. These were nice upgrades, but we still didn't have any way to fix the damage problem. And we didn't get our first clue until after talking to Thizabald Thorm, where in his back room we picked up the Punch Drunk Bastard. This is a unique weapon that I highly recommend for a Drunk Monk playthrough. It creates a small thunder explosion in an AoE after an attack, only when you are intoxicated. And in a miracle showing, this actually worked with pocket sand. So, I found some willing participants to help me test out my new toys. Over and over, we reached into our pockets and threw sand in the eyes of our enemies until they fell over and could no longer avoid our sandy barrage. This recent buff did come with a small downside though. We needed a bonus action to drink alcohol, and it only lasts for 2 turns, meaning we would only get the explosion every other turn. It did give us another idea, however. Could this new power allow us to damage items? After placing some bombs, Shadowheart made the most important scientific discovery of the run. Fellas, you know what this means. Grimforge is back on the menu. Astarion and Gale also tried to theorize a way to use our actions to get each other drunk, but not everybody was born to be a scientist, and this was met with failure. I figured a floating eyeball would be a prime target for my sand toss party, but I soon learned that if you didn't actually deal damage to the target, the explosion wouldn't trigger, so I had to throw sand at Astarion in order to solve the problem. This is an issue I'm sure we won't come across for the entire rest of the playthrough.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
My violent alcoholism also proved to be a viable mining method to collect the mithril ore. However, some party members were more accepting of this strategy than others. We then decided to help somebody other than ourselves by freeing True Soul Near. We set down the explosives, threw sand in Shadowheart's eyes, and oh. Okay, we'll be right back. Ignoring all the quests that we just failed, it was time to craft the mithril armor. The plan was to make 2 shields that would give us immunity to critical hits, a really nice upgrade. Gale offered to sacrifice himself in order to grab the first shield, and it looked so fun that I decided I'd give it a try myself. Truth be told, Act 1 consisted mostly of pain and the slow realization of what I had just gotten myself into. I was also afraid that if I spent any more time there, I would run out of keyboards. That being said, I was ready to leave it all behind me, and asked a demon to help me use an elevator. He politely agreed, and finally, after nearly 30 hours, it was time to enter the Shadowfell.
Wait.
No, Shadowheart, we're leaving right now. I don't even...
Wait.
Shadowheart, please. I really just want to go.
Wait.
Oh my god, what?
There is a holy weapon hidden away.
Okay, Jesus Christ, Shadowheart. We'll go get your spear. Fine. This ended up being a decision that I instantly regretted. The only thing that has been saving us up until this point is that if the enemies fail a saving throw, Sand Toss will actually blind them, giving them disadvantage on their attack rolls against us. This, in combination with our damage reduction, means we were actually able to survive a fair bit of time in fights. However, Shar's undead warriors are completely immune to blind, and after 4 rounds, we were only able to barely drop one of them. Shadowheart tried to flee, but in a brain-dead move, I sent her right into the arms of a skelly man waiting in ambush. I had to use a scroll of gaseous form to hide behind some bars, and then a speed potion, followed by a scroll of fly, to finally escape this waking nightmare. I changed my pants, and then picked off the fragmented soldiers before grabbing Shadowheart's special spear. After that, we headed down the elevator to complete Shar's gauntlet. We used knock to open one of the few doors a team of 4 rogues can't actually open, and we were ready to prepare for the Ketheric fight. If you don't know, Ketheric is considered one of the toughest fights in any honor mode round. With this in mind, I'm going to need you to get comfortable with the idea of human batteries. I feel that it is important to remind you all at this time that I am the hero of this story, and therefore morally correct. Now, what you may have done before is cast Longstrider with a hireling, and found out that this will carry over even if they leave the party. Many buffs that don't require concentration work the exact same way. What you may not have done is tested this to the extent that you've been put on every spectrum known to man. But don't worry, because I did just that. Longstrider for that extra 3 meters of movement speed, and upcasted 8 for an additional 10 health points, protection from poison for advantage on poison saving throws, and warding bond, working the exact same way that I mentioned earlier. What I didn't mention earlier is whoever casts this spell will take the same amount of damage as the person they are protecting. So, naturally, Lae'zel offered to be Shadowheart's human battery. The next step was to painstakingly build a box ladder up to Ketheric's first arena. I wanted to eliminate most of his allies before the fight since we didn't have the damage to fight them all off at once. Unfortunately, on this day, I learned that if you didn't fight Lovecraft's version of Spider-Man, he sits right here on the roof. This encounter required multiple trips back and forth to camp and left me feeling truly hopeless for the up-and-coming fight. If we were still struggling this hard against skeletons, what chance did we have against the God of Death? Would it really all be for nothing when we got down into the Mind Flayer colony? No, I simply cannot let it end like this. I would not go quietly into that sweet night. This game forgot one thing. I'm a Sekiro player, and we do not accept reality. So I prowled the streets for 18 hours and injected myself with every random needle I came across. Clarity hit like I was a Vietnamese child fighting Mike Tyson. The solution was so obvious. I set up my PC in the bathtub, then connected my toaster to the ceiling, and a switchboard programmed to drop the toaster if I get a game over, instantly ending my IRL honors mode run. Under this pressure, John San absorbed 8 million years of universal knowledge, underwent ego death, and at the end, he saw the truth.
We need to build a wall.
And thus began the Great Barrel Crusade.
Ese emoji de durazno me gusta cuando lo mueve. Se prende todo el baile y le compran lo que quiere. Botella por aquí, botella por allá. Ese cuerpo tiene a todos a punto de bailar. Un pasito muy prohibido. Emoji de durazno me tiene a todo prendido. Te llamo y te llamo, pero no bailas conmigo. Muévete mamita con el ritmo de mi güiro. Pasito para adelante, pasito para acá. Pasito chiquitita que te voy a chipilear. Pasito para adelante, pasito para acá. Ese emoji de durazno me lo quiero devorar.
Okay, that took a while, but we now had around 300 crates and barrels. Why was this necessary? Well, after that rooftop encounter, we knew that if Merkel spawned any of his bone buddies to help him out, it would spell disaster. But if we could isolate Merkel from his friends, potentially we would be able to have our way with him. Our flawless plan was in motion. However, there's no going back once we enter the Mind Flayer colony. So, it's time for our final buffs. Step 1. Tell a party mushroom his favorite beach is open for business. You now have an extra 1d6 to attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws. Step 2. Solve a puzzle and unlock the Morning Lord's Radiance buff, giving an extra 1d4 radiant damage to all your attacks. Step 3. Cry briefly when you realize, just like everything else in this game, it does not work with Sand Toss. Step 4. Pray to Shar for 5 extra charisma, intelligence, and wisdom. Step 5. Quietly piss yourself because you haven't been risen Shadowheart and she might fail the run right here. Step 6. Take a bunch of muscle relaxers to balance out the stress-induced seizures. And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we're ready for Ketheric. We met up with Jaheira outside of Moonrise Towers and began the assault. I had spent almost 5 hours earlier clearing out the guards, so I expected to find very little resistance when we entered. But I missed one zealot, and Jaheira dove in to be the only casualty on our side. Moving on. We pushed up to the roof to face down the man himself. We only hit Ketheric once in the first round, dealing a single point of damage. But with haste spores, Dame Aelin got off 3 massive swings. We needed her to hold off Ketheric while all 4 of us fought a medium-sized dog. Eventually, we were triumphant, and just in time. One odd thing that I had never seen before is one of our hirelings had somehow managed to join combat from camp. He would actually occasionally heal himself, making our warding bond last longer. I'm not sure what caused this. However, something about the world itself seemed to be violently rejecting the challenge. The first bug was a false olive branch from a bucking bronco that wanted nothing more than to crush my skull. Unbeknownst to me, Faerun had already begun to twist and contort into a buggy and corrupted mess. A bizarre event, to say the least. And yet, it would end up being the most mundane bug of the entire run, and the only one that could be considered convenient. One thing we had going for us in this fight was that Ketheric needed to use one of his attacks every turn to down Aelin, which he very much enjoyed. What he enjoyed a little bit less was having 40 kilos of sand thrust into his cornea. After a lengthy encounter, the villain fled with his tentacle between his legs. We jumped after him into the depths and used my patented intoxicated explosion technique to bypass the wall that would have otherwise soft-locked me here. Filling our hearts with hope and pockets with sand, we braced ourselves to meet destiny. Construction on the wall needed to begin immediately. I entered a religious trance and furiously started my holy work. I was so delirious at this point that I didn't even notice Ketheric had spotted me. I asked him to give me a goddamn minute, I'm doing something here. He really didn't like that. But I wouldn't stop until the physical manifestation of my mental illness had been fully realized. 40 hours of work stood before us, and in a word, it was beautiful, which made what came next all the more painful. Well, shit. My walls burned down around me as I smashed the emergency glass to reach the explosives in my bag. Chugging an entire bottle of wine, I was ready to throw the Hail Mary pocket sand. But Merkel exists solely to bring pain into this world, and in one final middle finger, he wouldn't give me the satisfaction of a finishing blow. It was a victory, yes, but there would be no celebrations in camp that night. No songs sung around the campfire, only the cold, familiar fear that we would soon run out of luck. Dawn broke reluctantly that morning as we heard our alarm go off. Except it wasn't an alarm, but a new breed of racist aliens who wanted my sand. Or something like that. I didn't really wait for them to explain. Probably a good idea, since the next one we met punched us really hard in the face several times. That fight was actually pretty close, but we don't have to worry about it right now, because for once, I happily fought alongside our squiddy stalker, and watched while Daddy Mindflayer saved the day. This fight was cathartic in a way that's hard to describe, because anytime I see a damage number above 6, it feels like 200 cc's of morphine straight to the spine. That is to say, it's very exciting, but not nearly as exciting as what comes next, because we're now in Act 3, and we have a mission. We need to find and throw sand in the eyes of this man until he is dead. Circumventing the fortress got us into the lower city, where we ignored everything to reach the hag survivors. And look at that, there's our guy now. But actually I lied, because he's secretly been a redcap this entire time. No way. As a reward for our seemingly random acts of violence, we were given a hangover cure, and went to go share it with a pirate in need. We threw the potion at her, and she coughed up what was making her sick. Better out than in, I always say. Word of our medical miracles quickly spread, earning us the duelist prerogative, which I am happy to report actually works with Sand Toss. We also grabbed the Helmet of Grit, giving us an extra bonus action if we're below 50% HP. But the best piece of loot by far was this amulet, which keeps us drunk longer. The hunt for upgrades continued in the sewers, where I found Lae'zel had left camp without my permission. In an unexpected twist, it was actually a religious zealot who talked a lot about her lord and father. I could only assume she had kidnapped Lae'zel as leverage to get us to join her murder cult. However, this didn't change the fact Lae'zel left camp without me specifically telling her to do so. This was unacceptable. To properly chastise our human battery, we were going to need to get her back. In order to pull this off, we would need to pass their initiation trial, which consisted of assassinating a local politician. Now, I was already going to do this, but don't tell Orin that. I figured if I was going to become the most wanted man in the land, I should probably be a higher level. But this is where things got physically painful, because Faerun was no longer in silent protest of the challenge. It began screaming its hatred for me from the rooftops, and punishing me for continuing the holy war. The guild battle, for example, completely broke, nobody would take their turns, and it took almost 3 hours. The hooligans outside of the Steel Watch chose to skip their dialogue and went right for my throat. Astarion barely escaped and flew into the foundry, where he somehow landed on a guard mid-flight, instantly dying to fall damage. Excellent. Robot guards that usually explode when you do enough damage simply refused to do so. And I won't lie, I was not responding well to these new stressors. In fact, the only two things that brought me any joy during this part was finding the Dark Amethyst Stone would follow you into Act 3, and Shadowheart's build. Remember that strange interaction with Warding Bond and Uncanny Dodge? Well, Shadowheart was currently taking it one step further. Her weapon provides Force Conduit charges, which can reduce damage taken up to 7. Combined with Ketheric's armor and Heavy Armor Master, we can push this all the way to 12 reduced damage. Putting this together means a 48 damage attack becomes 24, then 12, then 0. I mention this now because she still died many times while sieging the Foundry, and no, you don't want to know how long that took. Although, I set aside plenty of time to torment Gondians who were clearly to blame for the entire ordeal. Soon after, we took site control, and Shadowheart sent us a nuclear payload. Astarion planted the bomb, sending the army of buggy robots back to the lobby. Thank the gods. I assumed we were running out of time to save Lae'zel, because it had been almost 2 in-game months since we last saw her, and I'm not sure if the murder cult was actually feeding her, which meant we were off to Worm's Rock Fortress. The plan had been for John Sand to use his dangerous drinking habit to lure Gortash and his men to the door. But when I checked my inventory, I noticed the nuclear bomb didn't actually get consumed earlier. Well, I guess subtlety was never an option. This would never actually kill Gortash, but it would also never kill me, because of another rogue passive called Uncanny Evasion. My party swarmed in to take down the security guards, while I threw sand in the politician's eyes. He quickly showed off his true form, and round after round, we traded blows. Unfortunately, a few minutes in, I put ourselves into a bad position, and half of our team was down. It took a few rounds to recover from this blunder, but by turn 9, we had almost gotten him alone. Despite this, and our cheesy entrance, we had barely scratched through the temporary hit points granted in Phase 2. A big crit got us back into the fight, making it a 4-on-1. Gortash turned it into a 3v1, and I fixed that as soon as possible. He tried again, and again, and again, and... Okay, man, I'm running out of resurrection scrolls, please stop. Eventually, he did stop, when I killed him. Immediately going to refill our supply of resurrection scrolls and head to Lae'zel. We very normally opened a boarded up door, and inside was a note that told us we needed to go to a wine party. And let me tell you, no group of adventurers was more experienced in this field. At the party, we met several helpful dwarves who told us what to do next. And for the first time ever, a wonderful time was had by all.
Terrific mouthfeel.
Our sources led us to an old man who asked us how Gortash died. We told him the truth, slowly and painfully, allowing us to reach where Lae'zel was being held. But there's still one thing standing in our way. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's throw some sand.
Mr. Sandman, man me a sand. Make him the cutest man corridor who can. Give him 2 sands, like Sanses and Hanses. Then tell him that his sands and mans are Hanses. Sandman, sand so a man. Don't have no Sanses to sand a man. Please turn on your sandy hands. Mr. Sandman, send me a sand. Bum 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 bum. Mr. Sandman, man me a sand. Make him the cutest man corridor who can't. Give him the sand that I'm not a hander. Then tell him that his sands and mans are handers. Sandman, sand so a man. Don't have no sanses to sand a man. Please turn on your sandy hands. Mr. Sandman, sand me a man. Bum 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 bum. Mr. Sandman,
Sand?
man us a sand. Give him 2 hookers, cute man, hand sand band and green. Give him a sandy door like Sandliachi, and lots of sandy hands like Lamborghini. Mr. Sandman, hooked or to sand, would be so sandy before we're to hand. So please turn on your sandy hands. Mr. Sandman, sand us, man corridor. Mr. Sandman, sand us a man.
In an actually shocking turn of events, Orin's fight was the most fun of the entire playthrough. It was insanely close, but using every trick we'd learned until this point, victory was ours. Are we about to pull this off? The finish line was in sight, just a couple hundred sand tosses away. We found the final boss, hiding in a pool of grease, and instantly showed him we were the ones in charge. Just as I was on the cusp of dominating it, our squid betrayed us and dragged us away.
Do not exaggerate. You nearly died.
He is clearly a sick and deranged individual, so we headed right back out to try again. John Sand hasn't been to the upper city in a while, so he wasn't sure if this is how it usually looked, but at least we found the brain pretty quickly. In a classic move, Astarion drank a potion of invisibility and easily bypassed the giant army of... Oh, I see. Or rather, you see, invisible people. What a shame. As I was saying, while in combat, Astarion easily bypassed the giant army blocking the way. and the pocket sand only team ascended the Netherbrain. I started the fight by reading a book. Actually, it was hollowed out and filled with alcohol. I drank the most expensive bottle I could find in one gulp and began sprinting around the battlefield at Mach 10. The dragon did some cool dragon stuff, but none could penetrate Shadowheart's domes, and it was all down to this. By the time we got inside, there were 4 rounds to work with. John Sand attacked first, using Luck of the Far Realms for a guaranteed critical hit. Astarion followed suit for the biggest hit we ever saw this game. After Shadowheart chipped in, we had done 72 damage in 1 round. For reference, it would usually take us 5 turns to do that. I wept with pride for how far our party has come. In this moment, I am euphoric. We followed up with more sand next round, but saw that it was invulnerable. Oh right, I forgot. Whenever you do damage to the brain, it becomes invulnerable to that damage type next turn. No big deal, we just have to deal as much damage as we can in the following round and set up our explosives for the final turn. We didn't have any guaranteed crits left for our next attacks, but in total, we were able to throw sand hard enough at the brain to deal 157 damage. As the clock ran out, Gale finally made it to the platform and began his unstable artwork. My heart pounded in my chest as I ensured there were plenty of fire pots around to set off everything else. We targeted the brain with our final batch of pocket sand and sat back to enjoy the fireworks.
Leave me alone!
Here we are. Nobody else could use the explosive bat this turn, let alone get themselves drunk enough to trigger any bombs. After 60 hours, we were met with the end of our honors mode run. We had remembered our lesson from Grimforge too late, and upon our first reload, I threw sand in Astarion's eyes, and I beat Baldur's Gate 3 using only pocket sand in Dishonors mode. Thank you for watching. This was my first ever challenge run, and it was a lot of fun. I hope to create more in the future. In the meantime, take care of yourself.